My family labeled me a failure and cut me out of their lives. When I became successful, they begged me for help, so I gave them a taste of their own medicine. Alright, so here's the thing. My name's Brian, and my family basically decided I was unsuitable to be part of their perfect little world. Why? Because I didn't follow the path they wanted. My parents, Janet and Richard, were all about appearances, country club memberships, perfect Christmas cards, fake smiles at church. They wanted me to go to college, become a lawyer or something fancy, marry a nice girl like, perfect, Susan, my older sister, and have 2 kids. But I didn't want that life. I wanted to do my own thing. I dropped out of college in my second year to start a business. They lost it. I remember Janet screaming, "You're going to embarrass this family. Do you even know how hard we've worked for this reputation?" Like what? Reputation? We weren't the Kennedys, chill. They kicked me out of the house and told the whole extended family I was a failure. Susan, of course, backed them up. "You're being selfish," she said. "Mom and Dad deserve better." Anyway, fast forward 6 years. My little failure business? Yeah, I sold it for $3.7 million. I'm not gonna lie, it felt good seeing those zeros in my bank account. Suddenly, the family who had washed their hands of me started reaching out. Janet called first, all sweetness and concern. "Brian, we were just talking about you the other day. How are you doing, honey?" I played along at first, curious. "Oh, I'm good, just keeping busy." "Oh, we're so proud of you," she gushed. "You've done so well for yourself. We should get together soon." She kept going on about how family is everything, and no matter what, we always support each other. I had to put the phone on mute to laugh. These were the same people who didn't even invite me to Thanksgiving for years. Then came Richard. He wasn't as subtle. He called and flat out said, "Hey son, I've been thinking. We're all getting older, and it'd be nice to have some extra security, you know? Maybe you could help your old dad out with some investments." "Investments, huh?" "Sure, Dad." "And Susan?" Oh, she showed up with the crocodile tears. "I just feel so guilty, Brian. I wish I'd been there for you. We were young and stupid. But we're still siblings. Can we move past it?" "Right." Except she conveniently left out the part where her husband's construction company had gone bankrupt, and they were drowning in debt. I'm not gonna lie, I was angry. These people treated me like garbage when I needed them most, and now they wanted my money? But instead of shutting them down, I decided to play along. I told them I wanted to reconnect and help out. What they didn't know, I had a plan. So, after years of radio silence, I told them I was ready to reconnect. And let me tell you, they rolled out the red carpet. Janet invited me over for dinner at their house, the same house I hadn't been welcome in for years. "Bring a nice bottle of wine," she said. "We'll make it a family affair." When I showed up, the vibe was surreal. Janet was acting like she'd been my biggest cheerleader all along. She was all smiles, hugging me like we were on a Hallmark movie set. Richard gave me this awkward dad pat on the back, and Susan looked like she just won the lottery. The dinner was forced. Janet kept saying things like, "We've always known you were so smart, Brian. It was just a matter of time before you made it big." Susan chimed in with, "I always told my friends you were the talented one in the family." "Oh, really, Susan? Is that why you told your friends I was a loser who'd never amount to anything?" And then came the ask. I could feel it coming from a mile away. Over dessert, some fancy cake Janet probably spent hours on just to impress me, Richard cleared his throat. "So, Brian," he said, trying to sound casual, "we've been thinking about this family business idea. Something we could all work on together, you know? Build something as a family." Janet jumped in. "Yes. We've been brainstorming, and with your experience, you'd be perfect to lead it. Of course, we'd all contribute equally." "Equally, huh?" "Sure." I played along, acting interested. "What kind of business are we talking about?" "Oh, well," Richard started stumbling over his words. "We haven't ironed out all the details, but maybe something like real estate? It's a safe investment." Translation: they wanted me to bankroll the whole thing while they sat back and reaped the benefits. Susan piped up. "And you know, Tom's company went under, so he has so much free time now. He'd be such an asset." "An asset?" Tom, her husband, was the guy who once told me to man up and stop embarrassing the family. when I was struggling. Sure, Susan. He'd be a huge asset. I told them I'd think about it. Janet's eyes lit up and she said, "Take your time, sweetheart. We're just so happy to have you back." But the second I walked out of that house, I knew I wasn't just going to say no, I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could use me. So, after that bizarre family dinner, I decided to keep them on the hook for a little while. I told them I was seriously considering their family business idea and that I needed some time to figure out how we could structure it. Of course, Janet was thrilled. She called me every other day with ideas and updates that were really just excuses to make sure I wasn't losing interest. Meanwhile, Richard started buttering me up too. He'd text things like, "Proud of you, son," and "You're an inspiration to all of us." This was coming from the same guy who once told me I'd never amount to anything because I didn't respect authority. I guess a few $1,000,000 changes people's definition of respect. Then Susan, oh boy, she was the most obvious. She started texting me random memes and videos, like we were best friends. "OMG, this reminded me of you." She'd write under some dumb video of a cat falling off a chair. Who even was this person? I hadn't heard from her in years. The kicker came about a week later. Susan invited me over to her house for dinner, just the two of us. She said she wanted to clear the air and have a real heart-to-heart. I figured, why not? It'd be fun to see how far she'd go to sell her little redemption arc. When I got there, it was immediately clear what was going on. Tom wasn't home, and her kids, who I'd never even met before, were sent off to a sleepover. The table was set with candles and wine, and Susan was way too dressed up for a sibling dinner. We sat down, and she launched into her speech. "Brian, I know we've had our differences. And I regret not supporting you when you needed me most." She even started crying. "You're so successful now, and I'm so proud of you. I just wish we could go back and be the kind of siblings we were meant to be." It was hard not to laugh. I mean, this woman hadn't said a kind word to me in years, and now she was pulling the tearful guilt trip? I played it cool though. I nodded along, saying things like, "I appreciate that, Susan. It means a lot to hear you say it." And then, the real reason for the dinner came out. She leaned forward, lowering her voice like it was some big secret. "Tom and I are going through a really rough time right now. The bankruptcy has been so hard, and we're just struggling, you know?" Here it comes, I thought. "We were thinking," she continued, "maybe you could help us out? Just a little loan to get back on our feet. Nothing huge. We'd pay you back, of course." I smiled and said, "Of course, Susan. I'll think about it." But as I walked out that night, I knew this wasn't going to be a loan. It was going to be payback. At this point, I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. They thought they were reeling me in, but they had no idea I was setting the trap. Janet, Richard, and Susan were so busy imagining my money lining their pockets that they didn't even notice the red flags I was deliberately throwing out. The next step? Making them think I was fully committed. I told Janet I'd been seriously researching business ideas and wanted to meet as a family to discuss next steps. Naturally, she jumped on it. "Oh, Brian, that's wonderful. We'll host a big family dinner, Richard will grill, and I'll make my famous pie." "Perfect," I said. "But let's make it official. I'll draft up some basic agreements, just to keep things professional." She hesitated for a second, probably because she hadn't expected me to treat this like an actual business, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, honey. Whatever you think is best." While Janet and Richard were busy planning the dinner, I called Susan. I told her I was leaning toward helping her out with a small loan to cover her debts, but that I needed to see her financials first. "It's just to make sure I'm not putting you in a worse position," I said, keeping my tone all concerned and helpful. She was so desperate she didn't even question it. Within 48 hours, she emailed me everything: bank statements, unpaid bills, credit card debt, the works. It was worse than I thought. They were in the hole for over $150,000, and Tom wasn't bringing in anything. I spent the next week preparing my master plan. I consulted a lawyer friend of mine to make sure everything was airtight, then created 2 sets of documents. One was a business investment agreement for the family meeting. The other was a personal loan contract for Susan. Both were completely legitimate on paper but had terms so ridiculous they'd never sign them. For example, the business agreement stated that I'd have 100% control of the company, and any profits would go to paying me back for my initial investment, at a 20% interest rate. Basically, they'd never see a dime. The loan for Susan had a clause stating that if she missed a single payment, I'd have the right to seize assets, including her house. It wasn't about actually going through with these terms. It was about sending a message: you don't get to treat me like dirt, and then come crawling back when it's convenient. When the day of the family dinner arrived, I showed up with a big smile and folders of paperwork. The trap was set. So, the big family dinner started off just like I expected, over the top and fake as hell. Janet had outdone herself, with the table looking like it belonged in some fancy food magazine. Richard was manning the grill like he was hosting a backyard barbecue for billionaires, and Susan was playing the doting sister, offering to refill my drink every 5 minutes. The whole time, I played along, smiling, laughing at their jokes, and acting like I was totally invested in this family business nonsense. But I could tell they were dying to get to the point. Finally, after dinner, Richard cleared his throat. "Well, Brian, you've got us all curious. What's this big idea you've been working on?" I smiled, pulled out the folder I'd prepared, and set it on the table. "I've put together a proposal. It's all in here: roles, responsibilities, and terms of investment. If we're going to do this, we need to do it the right way." Janet practically snatched the folder out of my hands. She flipped through it, her smile fading as she skimmed the terms. "Wait, you'd have full control of the company?" "Of course," I said calmly. "I'd be the sole investor, so it makes sense. Don't worry, you'd all be paid salaries for your roles. It's all outlined in the profit distribution section." Richard took the folder from her and started reading. "A 20% return on your investment? That's pretty steep, son." "It's industry standard," I said with a shrug. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I completely understand. We don't have to move forward." That's when Janet jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "Oh no, Brian, it's not that we don't want to move forward. It's just, well, this is a lot to process. Maybe we could negotiate some of the terms?" I leaned back in my chair, smiling. "Of course. But the terms are designed to protect the investor, me, so I don't end up losing everything." The room went quiet. They knew I had them cornered. Either they accepted the ridiculous terms, or the whole plan fell apart. Then Susan, who had been sitting quietly until now, spoke up. "Brian, about that loan you mentioned." "Right on cue." I pulled out the second folder and handed it to her. "This is the loan agreement I've put together. Take your time reading it, and let me know if you have any questions." She opened it, and I watched her face drop. "Collateral? Brian, I can't put my house up as collateral. It's standard for a loan of this size," I said. "And you wouldn't lose the house unless you defaulted on the payments. But again, no pressure. If it doesn't work for you, I understand." She looked like she wanted to cry. "But I thought you wanted to help." "I do," I said. "But this is still business, Susan. I'm not a bank, and I can't take on unnecessary risk." The rest of the evening was awkward as hell. They tried to make small talk, but the mood was completely different. I stayed polite and professional, but I could tell they were scrambling to figure out their next move. When I left, I felt no guilt. They wanted my money, not my presence, and now they were realizing that I wasn't going to play their game. But this was only the beginning. After the dinner, things got interesting. The silence was deafening for a few days. No texts, no calls, nothing. I figured they were regrouping, trying to come up with a way to convince me without actually agreeing to my terms. I was almost disappointed. It was too predictable. Then, about a week later, Susan broke the silence. She called me, and the second I answered, she launched into full emotional manipulation mode. "Brian, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I just feel like you don't trust me." Her voice cracked, like she was holding back tears. "We're family. How could you ask me to risk my home? Do you really think I'd screw you over?" I let her vent for a bit before responding calmly. "Susan, it's not about trust. It's about accountability. The terms are there to protect both of us. If you're uncomfortable, I completely understand, and we don't have to move forward." That shut her up for a moment. Then she tried a different tactic. "What if we skip the paperwork? You could just loan me the money, no strings attached. It's not like I'd ever take advantage of you." I almost laughed. "Susan, you know I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." She got quiet after that, mumbled something about needing more time to think, and hung up. The next day, Janet called. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. Brian, this whole thing feels so transactional. We're a family, not business partners. Why are you making this so complicated? Because I've seen what happens when money and family mix without boundaries, I said. And let's not pretend this isn't about money. You only reached out to me after you found out I was successful. She gasped, all fake offended. How could you say that? We've always loved you, Brian. We've just had our differences. Janet, you didn't even invite me to Susan's wedding. You told people I was a bad influence. Now suddenly you're proud of me? Let's not rewrite history. She sputtered, trying to come up with a defense, but I wasn't in the mood to listen. I ended the call with a polite but firm. If you're serious about the business, let me know. Otherwise, let's stop wasting each other's time. The cracks were starting to show. But what really pushed things over the edge was what happened next. I got a call from an unknown number one evening. When I picked up, it was Tom, Susan's husband. Listen, Brian, he started, his tone weirdly aggressive. I don't appreciate the way you're treating Susan. She's been nothing but supportive of you, and now you're acting like some big-shot banker, lording your money over everyone. Tom, I said calmly, this is between me and Susan. I don't see how it involves you. It involves me because we're family. He snapped. And honestly? You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for your parents raising you. You owe them. Oh, that was rich. I owe them? I repeated, laughing. Pretty sure they kicked me out when I needed them most. If anything, they owe me an apology. Well, maybe if you weren't such a selfish. I hung up mid-rant. I wasn't about to let Tom lecture me about family loyalty when he was clearly just as desperate for a handout as the rest of them. At this point, I knew they weren't going to back down. If anything, they were getting more aggressive. And that's when I decided to turn the heat up. After Tom's little meltdown, I decided it was time to push them even further. I sent out a group text to Janet, Richard, and Susan. Hi all, I've thought it over and decided I'll need full written commitments by the end of the month to move forward with anything. No pressure, but I have other opportunities I'm considering. Within minutes, Janet called. The end of the month? That's so soon, Brian. Can't we have more time? No, I said. If you're serious about this, you'll make it work. I wasn't actually rushing them because I cared about their decision. I just wanted to watch them scramble. And oh, did they scramble. Susan texted separately, begging for an extension, while Richard sent a vague email about exploring alternative options. It was chaos, and I was loving every second of it. But I wasn't done yet. After my deadline text, things got even messier. Susan called me in tears the next day. Brian, I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. We just need a little more time to get everything in order. Tom's been looking into part-time work, and we're trying so hard. I stayed calm. Susan, I need commitments, not promises. If you can't meet the terms, that's fine, but I'm not going to wait forever. Janet, on the other hand, tried a different approach. She sent me a long, guilt-trippy email about how hard she and Richard had worked to give me a good life. She even threw in a line about how they'd sacrificed for me, and this was my chance to give back. The best part? She closed it with, we don't need anything fancy, just enough to feel secure. After all, family is what matters most. Right. Family mattered so much they tossed me out when I didn't fit their mold. I ignored the email. Then came Richard. He wasn't as emotional as the others. He tried to appeal to my business sense. He called and said, Brian, I get that you want guarantees, but this family business could be something special. You'd be setting up a legacy, something your future kids could be proud of. Kids? I said, laughing. That's a little premature, don't you think? He stumbled a bit but quickly shifted gears. I'm just saying, this isn't just about money. It's about what we can build together. Funny, I said. Because so far, all I've heard is how much you need from me. What exactly are you offering in return? Silence. He didn't have an answer. By now, their desperation was painfully obvious. And honestly, I was just getting started. A few days later, Janet called me again, but this time, she wasn't sweet and charming, she was furious. Brian, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You're treating us like strangers. Am I? I said calmly. Because that's exactly how you treated me when I was struggling. That's not fair, she snapped. We were trying to teach you a lesson. We wanted you to grow up and take responsibility. I almost laughed. Oh, so kicking me out and cutting me off was helping me? And now that I've actually made something of myself, you suddenly want to reconnect? She went silent for a second, then switched tactics. Fine. If you won't help us out of love, then at least think about what people will say. Do you really want everyone knowing you abandoned your family in their time of need? There it was, pure manipulation. I'd expected it, but hearing it out loud still annoyed me. Janet, I said, you can spin the story however you want. I don't care what people think. This isn't about what's fair to you. It's about what's fair to me. I hung up before she could reply. The next day, I sent a final text to all of them. I've made my terms clear. If you're not willing to accept them, we don't have anything to discuss. Let me know by the end of the week. Otherwise, I'll assume we're done here. It was blunt, and it left no room for negotiation. They wanted to play games, but I was making the rules now. The day after I sent that final text, the responses started rolling in. First, Susan called me again, her voice trembling. Brian, please don't do this. You're tearing the family apart. I know we messed up, but can't we just move forward? Forget all the paperwork and contracts, can't we just trust each other? Susan, I said, keeping my voice calm. Trust is earned, not demanded. If you want help, you'll need to accept the terms. This is the last time I'll say it. She started crying, loud, dramatic sobs, and mumbled something about how Tom was going to lose it if they didn't get the loan. I didn't have the energy to console her. I've given you all the information you need. It's your choice, I said before hanging up. Next came Janet. She sent me a long-winded email, but this time, it was dripping with venom. She accused me of being heartless, of letting money poison my soul, and of turning my back on the people who had raised me. You'll regret this one day, she wrote. When we're gone, and you're all alone, you'll wish you had acted differently. I didn't even bother replying. Then, Richard called me that evening. I was half expecting another guilt trip, but instead, he went straight to anger. You think you're better than us now, don't you? Just because you've got some money in the bank? Let me tell you something, Brian, you wouldn't be where you are today without the values we taught you. I couldn't help but laugh. Values? You mean the ones where you abandoned me when I didn't fit your mold? Or the ones where you only called me after I got rich? Which of those values should I be grateful for? He started shouting, but I cut him off. You've got 2 days to accept the terms or leave me alone. Your call. Then I hung up. It was clear they were reaching their breaking point. And honestly, I was enjoying every second of it. The deadline came, and as expected, no one reached out to agree to the terms. I wasn't surprised. They weren't looking for help with strings attached. They wanted a blank check, no questions asked. But what did surprise me was how quickly everything fell apart after that. 2 days after the deadline, Susan texted me, frantic. Brian, I don't know what to do. Tom's losing it. He's talking about selling the car and moving in with his parents. Please, can't we work something out? I ignored it. I wasn't about to bail her out when she refused to take responsibility. Then came Janet's attempt. She emailed me with a new spin. Brian, we've decided to take a step back and handle things on our own. It's clear that you're not ready to be part of this family again, and that's your choice. Just know that we'll always love you, no matter what. The passive-aggressive tone was obvious, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, just in case. The real kicker came a few days later, when I got a call from a mutual friend of the family, someone I hadn't talked to in years. Hey, Brian. She started hesitantly. I don't want to stir the pot, but are you okay? Your mom's been telling people you cut the family off and refused to help them when they were in financial trouble. I laughed, not even surprised. Oh, I'm fine, I said. I'm just not falling for their sob stories. She sighed. Well, they're making it sound like you're this cold, greedy guy who abandoned them. I thought you should know. This was exactly what I expected. They couldn't manipulate me, so they went for my reputation instead. But what they didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this. It was time to flip the script. After hearing about the lies Janet was spreading, I knew I had to take control of the narrative. If they wanted to drag my name through the mud, I was more than ready to show people the truth. First, I gathered everything, texts, emails, even the contract proposals I'd sent them. I made sure I had a timeline of their requests, my responses, and their refusals. Then I drafted a carefully worded email and sent it to the same mutual friend who had warned me. Hey, thanks for letting me know what my family's been saying. Just so you're aware, here's the full story. I wrote. I attached the evidence and added, I'm not looking to stir drama, but I won't stand by while they rewrite history to make me the villain. I sent similar messages to a few other people I trusted, people who I knew would see through my family's lies if they had the full context. The fallout was almost immediate. The mutual friend called me the next day. Wow, Brian. I had no idea things were that bad. Your mom made it sound like you refused to help them out of pure spite. I'm so sorry for believing her. Don't worry about it, I said. I just wanted to make sure you knew the truth. Within days, the story started to unravel. Friends and extended family began calling out Janet and Richard, questioning why they were painting me as the bad guy when I'd actually offered to help, under reasonable terms. Then, the real fun began. Susan called me again, but this time, she sounded panicked. Brian, why are you telling people about the loan? That was supposed to be private. Oh, now privacy matters? I said, barely holding back a laugh. Funny, considering you were fine with trashing me to anyone who'd listen. She stammered. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Mom's just upset. Can't you fix this? Fix what? I said. I didn't lie about anything. If the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should think about why. She hung up on me. Meanwhile, Janet sent another one of her dramatic emails, accusing me of airing family business and calling it a betrayal. I replied with 2 words. Your move. At this point, they were cornered. Their web of lies was falling apart, and I was just getting started. After my family realized they couldn't control the narrative anymore, they switched tactics. Janet sent me a long, overly apologetic email. It started with, Brian, we've made mistakes. I see that now. We only wanted what was best for you, but maybe we went about it the wrong way. I just want to fix things. Let's put the past behind us and start fresh. Classic Janet. When manipulation didn't work, she tried guilt-flavored peacekeeping. I ignored it. Then Richard called me. I let it go to voicemail, and his message was a mix of desperation and poorly veiled anger. Brian, I don't know what you're trying to prove here, but this isn't healthy. Family is family, and you're going to regret pushing us away. Just call me back so we can work this out like adults. Sure, because they'd acted like adults this whole time. The real surprise came from Susan. She texted me, claiming she wanted to meet in person. No pressure, she wrote. I just want to talk. No money, no business stuff, just us as siblings. I debated whether or not to agree, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a coffee shop, and as soon as I saw her, I could tell she was struggling. She looked tired, stressed, and way less confident than the Susan I'd grown up with. Brian, she started. I'm sorry. I've been a terrible sister to you. I let Mom and Dad influence me, and I didn't stand up for you when I should have. It sounded sincere, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. And why are you telling me this now? I asked. She hesitated, fidgeting with her coffee cup. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending everything's okay when it's not. Tom and I are drowning, and I know that's not your problem, but I miss my brother. I don't want to lose you over this. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't trying to manipulate me. Maybe she really was just broken. I appreciate that, Susan, I said. But you need to understand something. I'm not the same person you all pushed away. If we're going to rebuild anything, it's going to take time. And trust. She nodded, tears welling up. I understand. I just hope it's not too late. As I left the coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't expected, pity. But pity wasn't enough to change the plan. Not yet. After my meeting with Susan, I thought things might calm down. Maybe they'd finally back off and accept that I wasn't their safety net. But, of course, I underestimated Janet and Richard. A few days later, I got an email from Janet with the subject line, Final attempt to rebuild our family. It started predictably. Brian, we've been reflecting a lot on everything, and we realize we've hurt you deeply. We've let pride and misunderstandings get in the way of what really matters, our family. Then came the kicker. If money is what's causing this rift, we'll stop asking for your help. We just want you back in our lives, no strings attached. I almost believed her for a second. But then I got to the last paragraph. That said, if you do change your mind about helping, we'd be forever grateful. The door is always open. There it was, the same pattern, just wrapped in nicer words. I'd seen enough. I replied with a simple, straightforward message. Janet, I've made my terms clear, and I'm not revisiting them. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be built on honesty, not guilt or manipulation. Until then, I think it's best we take a step back. Brian. Not 10 minutes later, my phone started blowing up. First Janet, then Richard, then Susan. I let every call go to voicemail. Richard left a particularly angry message. Brian, I don't know who you think you are, but this is low, even for you. We're your family, and you don't just walk away from family. Walk away? That's funny, considering they'd already done that to me years ago. As I listened to the messages, it hit me. This wasn't about love or family. It never had been. This was about power, about control. They'd lost control of me, and they couldn't stand it. I knew it was time to shut the door for good. After Richard's angry voicemail, I knew there was no point in dragging this out any longer. They weren't going to change, and I wasn't going to let them keep trying to pull me back into their mess. It was time to end it, once and for all. I started by sending a final message to the family group chat. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've decided it's best for all of us to move forward separately. The way things have played out has shown me that what you want isn't a relationship, it's my resources. I wish you all the best, but I won't be part of this anymore. Please don't contact me again. Brian. Then, I blocked their numbers and emails. It was harsh, but it had to be done. For years, they'd only seen me as a failure, and now they only saw me as a solution to their problems. There was no middle ground where I was just their son or their brother. For a while, it was quiet. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message. But a few weeks later, I heard from one of our extended relatives, a cousin I'd always gotten along with. She called to check in on me, but I could tell she had something else on her mind. Brian, she said carefully, I've been hearing some things from your mom. She's telling everyone that you abandoned them after they tried to make amends. She's making you out to be the villain. I laughed. Of course she is. Should I say something? She asked. No, I said. Let her talk. Anyone who believes her isn't someone I want in my life anyway. And that was the truth. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I had my life, my success, and my peace of mind. They could twist the story however they wanted, but I wasn't playing their game. I haven't spoken to them since, and honestly, I don't miss it. Sometimes cutting toxic people out of your life, even if they're family, is the best thing you can do. It's not always easy, but it's worth it.